Our first word today is aberration. An aberration is when you depart from the right or normal or usual course. You can say, for example, his arrest was quite an aberration from his otherwise very moral life. It was something you probably didn't expect. It comes from the Latin aberrare, which meant to wander, to go away, to go astray. You might notice that it's composed of the prefix ab and the root error. So if you have away from the error, you're sort of wandering away, wandering around. In fact, that's a pretty good way of remembering this word. It's very close to the word error. A lot of times in astronomy, you talked about planets being aberrations because stars went in a certain pattern, but planets were called wanderers. They had these strange, odd patterns. They didn't act like the rest of the stars. So that's something from history that you should remember. The word itself should be paired up with the fourth definition down, a deviation from the expected course. Our next word is acrimonious. To be acrimonious is to be caustic, a stinging, maybe bitter type of speech or behavior. For example, I hate to use the stereotypical example, but here we go. My mother-in-law's behavior toward me was very acrimonious. She didn't like me at all. It comes from a very important Latin word, acre, meaning sharp. It's very closely related to acu, which also meant sharp. You get acre and acu as roots, and they always have something to do with sharp. In the physical sense, sharp can be like a knife, acupuncture, for example. In a more physical sense, if you have a sharp tongue, it means it's a very, very bitter sort of talking that you have with somebody. So you have acre, and you also have the moan part, the monia. Monia is a common suffix. You end a lot of things with monius in English, harmonious, sanctimonious, and it's just a state of action. It's the state of being very sharp in your criticism. Acrimonious should be paired up with the seventh definition down, sharp or acrid. Remember, we generally use the word acrimonious in the emotional sense, not the physical sense. Our next word is cacophonous. I like this word. It's a good word to know. It means having a very harsh sound, something that sort of is very discordant. The good example is, remember, is the shrieking sounds that you hear from metal. If they hurt your ears, that's very cacophonous. Sometimes a large crowd at a football stadium might be described as cacophonous. So it's usually not a pretty sound. It's usually not a rhythmic sound. It's certainly not a pretty sound. That's all what is meant by cacophonous. It comes from a word that goes way back in our history. It's caca. Caca is a word that even predates Latin. It meant to defecate. You actually even hear little children still picking it up. I need to go caca. It's exactly what you think I'm saying, but I'm not being really nasty in my word usage about it. I'm using euphemisms, but basically caca means caca. It's bad. And they combine that with the word, the Greek phone, where we get voice or sound. Most of you know things like telephone or phonics means sounds, and a suffix they throw in there, os. So if you have a bad sound, you basically are having a cacophonous sound. Cacophonous should be paired up with the third definition down, having a harsh or discordant sound. Our next word is inchoate. You have the in part in front there, so you probably know that it has something to do with being in or on something. The word inchoate basically means not yet fully developed. For example, you might use it this way: he had not thought of the business strategy, and because of this, his plans were so inchoate, they were doomed to failure. It generally means not developed, incomplete, and you have the in, which means the on, and the cohum, which meant to begin. The begin part goes way back, and I don't think you really need to know this. It meant to hitch up, but the word roots there aren't going to help you too much, but it's an important word, so you're just going to have to remember inchoate. It should be matched up with the bottom definition down in an early or initial stage, incomplete, disorganized. Our fifth word is mellifluous. If something is mellifluous, it means it's very good sounding, a very sweet or smooth flowing. A mellifluous voice, you'll hear that. Mellifluous tones. For example, you might say, her clear and smooth voice gave her speech a mellifluous tone. And I hope you can pick out the roots here. Mel comes from the Latin honey. We also get the word, a related word, very indirectly, but you can see the relationship. Mellow, something mellow. Honey is very smooth. And fluous, which meant flow. We still get the word flow from fluous, and you see it there almost directly. We get it in other words that we're going to cover. Superfluous, fluent, fluency. If you're fluent in a language, your language just flows. Influx is where you flow in, so a lot of flues in English. It should be paired up with the sixth definition on the list, sweetly or smoothly flowing, sweet sounding. Our next word is nebulous. It's a popular word as of late. We hear it more and more often. It's a word that means something that's sort of vague or indistinct or confused. You might have a nebulous recollection of the meeting. You sort of remember it, but you don't. A nebulous theory that really explains nothing. Something that really wasn't cogent, wasn't put together well. Something hazy. And it comes from the Latin meaning cloud, cloudy or misty or foggy. We actually still use it that way when we're talking in astronomy. We talk about nebulae, which is the sort of fuzzy, cloudy things in space that represent a large area of hundreds and thousands of stars, or where stars are being created. And it's an interesting word because of that. It should be paired up with the fifth definition on the list, vague or confused. Our seventh word is perfidy. You might more often see it in its noun version, perdition. Same word, actually. Perdition is the deliberate breach of somebody's faith or trust that you have in them. Somebody who cheats, lies, steals, who maybe commits treason is guilty of perfidy. A few years back, Tom Hanks, a famous actor, made a movie about a man who was a decent man, but he did very bad things, and he kept on doing worse and worse things. The name of the movie was Road to Perdition. You can remember this with the prefix per, which means to cut through or through something, and the root fidum, and that was the Latin word for faith. Matter of fact, if you have a very faithful dog, a lot of times you call it Fido. So Fido means faith. We get a lot of FIDs in English. Fidelity means you're trustworthy. Fiduciary is a trusting banking relationship. If you are somebody who's not part of your faith, you might call them an infidel. So that FID is an important root. So you cut through the faith, and if you do that, you are committing perfidy. It should be paired up with the ninth definition down, a deliberate breach of faith or trust. Our eighth word down is philanthropy. Anybody who does a lot of donation of money to help people are called philanthropic. They do good things. You might say the Bill Gates Foundation or the Carnegie Foundation or the Rockefeller Foundation does good things. They give a lot of money to charity and so forth. It comes from two roots, phil, which meant love. We get a lot of words in English with that. Philosophy is the love of wisdom. Philadelphia is the city of brotherly love. A lot of phils. Hydrophilic, they all come from phil. And the anthropy part is a Greek word also. Both of these are Greek roots. Anthros was a word for man. Anthropology we get from that. We get a lot of words with anthros in it, and always means man. So if you have a love of man, you probably give a lot of money away. It's something that you do because it's a moral thing to do. It should be paired up with the seventh definition down, a tendency or action for the benefit of others. Our ninth word is sophistry. Sophistry is usually a very subtle, very tricky, maybe even slightly believable argument, but in general it means that the truth is really not with the person who's using sophistry. They're usually using tricky linguistic methods to fool you. It's a fallacious method of reasoning. You might think of politicians who use sophistry to convince many people of the goodness of their deeds, but in reality they really have secondary motivations. They might say, I want to do this project because it will help the people, but it will only help a few of their constituents. So they're using sophistry. It was used in Greek times. It comes from the same soph, which is the word for wisdom. Remember, philosophy was a love of wisdom. Sophistry means you're wise, but you're sort of using it in a bad way. You're not using it in a way of being wise. You're using it in a way of trickery. You remember, there's some very, very smart people, tricksters, that can take advantage of you, so they are wise. Don't think that they're stupid, and they might use sophistry in order to do that. It might be paired up with the second definition down, misleading but clever reasoning. Our last word is superfluous. You'll see the two roots there, super and fluous. We've already done fluous. The word superfluous means that you're being more than sufficient, more than required. It's overflowing, and you can see the super means over, too much, and fluous means flow. It's overflowing, so it usually means unnecessary or needless. If you said, he is a man, he is a human being, yeah, it's sort of superfluous. All men are human beings, I suppose, so you've used superfluous language there. In context of what we're doing, we might say that learning every word in English is both impossible and superfluous. It's not really necessary to know every word in English. So it's from those two Latin words, super, meaning a lot, and flow, which is flow, and it should be paired up with the very top definition being more than is sufficient or required, excessive. And that ends those 10.